Well, Dan, that's a tremendously helpful and detailed answer. I appreciate your insight on that issue. Now, just out of curiosity, were you guys short Best Buy going into earnings, or is that a fairly new position?
Well, it was one of those, we weren't short Best Buy into earnings. When we saw what the earnings were, we were amazed that the stock was actually not down more.
Right.
So we shorted it that day. We had a lot of other positions that were negative on, demand for electronics. So, things were, we weren't unhappy. So I'll just sort of put it to you that way.
You certainly aren't the only bear by any means on this sector, and some of these macro themes that you're talking about. I think that investors are really starting to open their eyes and starting to realize that we are seeing what could be a fairly significant deceleration. But on the other hand,
well, I think the big.
Go ahead.
Well, I think the thing is the jury is, quite honestly, it's still out on that, because if you look at most of the interviews given to most semiconductor companies or to most technology companies, everybody's still bullish. So,
exactly.
But the thing that you have to realize is that at turning points, people don't necessarily see it. In 2008, it's a great example. The economy had already started to slow, but most companies were still saying business was great. You can go back to 2000, which is the classic, because when I was on the sell side, we downgraded the coverage of our semiconductor and computer hardware stocks in 2000, and people thought we were crazy. And then obviously we went into a slower period of growth and then a recession as we went into 01, and then all of a sudden the wheels came off. So the problem is at turning points, whether you're saying that it's a good time to buy stocks, which we thought back in April of 09, or whether you're thinking it might be a good time to start lightening up, it's never obvious when it's happening, and only time can really tell.
Now, you have experience as an analyst. You were ranked or named to, I believe it was Investment Magazine's All-American
Institutional
Research
Investor.
Team, Semiconductor Complex.
Yeah, Institutional Investor All-American Team, yeah.
So maybe you can give us some insight, because like I said, you certainly are not the only bear on Wall Street, but there's also a lot of bulls, and you touched on this. There's a lot of people who continue to pound the table on technology, on semiconductors. Maybe you can give us some insight. What are these analysts that are bullish keying on, and where do they have it wrong? And like I said, I think you touched on it a little bit, but if you could elaborate some, that'd be great.
Well, I think the easy way to think about it is the following. If you're following semiconductors, you're two steps removed potentially from the ultimate customer. So in other words, if, let's say, a cell phone manufacturer is having an issue selling their phones, the distributors may see it first, or a Best Buy that's selling that may see it first. Then they're going to turn around and tell the phone manufacturer, hey, by the way, we don't need as many phones. And then the phone manufacturer because orders change all the time, so it's nothing to get that concerned about. And so it may be a couple of months before the phone manufacturer, PC manufacturer hears that, hey, we have an issue, we don't need as much stuff. And then it may take them a month or two to say, you know what, this seems to be a trend with more than one player out there, before they turn around and then they cancel orders to the semiconductor companies. Now, what's making the time lag between what you and I are doing with our dollars at a Best Buy versus what a semiconductor company might be seeing is the fact that for the last year, semiconductor companies haven't been able to supply all the chips that their customers want. So what the customers have been doing is something called double ordering. So they've been ordering twice as much stuff as they actually need. And so they're not going to cut back until they're absolutely certain that their suppliers can give them everything that they want. And so the lag that you'd normally see between, let's say, a Nokia having issues and them turning around and saying, by the way, we don't need all the parts, is going to be a little bit longer, because Nokia wants to make completely certain that they can get things exactly when they need. So that's the really big difference. And it's always very hard to go out there and say, you know what, the company's saying everything's wonderful, but based on everything that we're seeing, this is what we think is going to happen 3 to 6 months from now. It's very easy to go out and say, you know what, I just talked to the company and business sounds great.
Right,
it's a very easy call to make. It's a lot more challenging to say, yeah, they're saying things are good today, but the issues I have are all of these, and this is why I think it could be an issue. Now, remember, the way I invest is you have certain stocks you don't like, but then you have certain stocks you do like. So Apple Computer, for example, is a company that we own on the long side. And so I view that as, you know what, it has a lot of the same trends that, let's say, a Best Buy has, with one difference. Apple Computer has products that everybody wants to buy. So if I happen to be wrong and end demand is better than what I think it happens to be, you know, my thought would be that Apple stock would outperform, you know, a Best Buy, let's say, where, you know, we think the stock probably has a little bit more downside left in it, and so we'd hopefully make money, you know, regardless of the situation.
Right.
Between
Absolutely.
those two.
So I certainly wanted to talk about Apple. I don't think any conversation, you know, in this whole general technology area is complete unless we talk a little bit about Apple. And you know, now that you told me that you're long, so clearly you have some insights into the company. Is this just an Apple story? I mean, the end market demand, you know, just yesterday we saw AT&T canceling pre-orders for the iPhone. I heard that the demand was something like 10 times as much for the last generation iPhone. Is this simply just an Apple-specific story? And if that is your opinion,
I mean, I think it really is. The reason we like Apple, and quite honestly, Apple's the type of stock that I don't like to like. By that, what I mean is, you know, everybody seems to like Apple. So it's not, you know, it's not that controversial, right? Unlike the semiconductors segment that we just talked about, where obviously there's a lot of controversy. But for me, why I think Apple's interesting is very simply the following. If you look at the number of cell phones that are expected to be sold this year, it's roughly about 1.3 billion phones. If you look at the number of phones that Apple expects to sell this year, it's about 40 million. So, you know, 40 million obviously is a very small number. It's a roughly 3% or so of the 1.3 billion total cell phones sold. So there's a lot of market share still up for grabs, especially as more and more people go from, you know, owning phones that can just do, let's say, texting or email to one that's got, you know, a full, you know, web surfing, web browsing experience. So I look at that and I say, well, you know, the iPhone really is setting the standards for that with a lot of the new features that they tend to introduce. If I look at the PC market, it's somewhat a similar situation. If you look at this year, we think that there's probably about, you know, 13 million Macs that are going to be sold between notebooks and desktops.
Right.
If you look at the total PC market, there's about 370 million PCs that are going to be sold. So, you know, again, very small market share, lots of room to grow there. And to some extent, if you look at the tablet or iPad, as they call it,
right,
you know, we think there's probably 10 million units of those being sold this year, and we could argue whether that's creating a totally different category to some extent, in the sense of this is finally sort of the tablet computer of choice, and so that's a brand new market, and, you know, we'll see how fast it grows. But to me, it's fascinating that, you know, we're thinking this year they can probably ship about 10 million of those from a dead start, you know, standing still start, where they're shipping 40 million iPhones and 13 million Macs in total. So that's pretty impressive if you think about it. And it's not that expensive a company in the sense that, you know, we think they can do probably $15 in earnings for this calendar year. And, you know, if you look at it and you say, wow, they're growing revenues at over 30% a year, you know, you pick what multiple you want to put on it, but obviously, you know, it's pretty interesting in terms of, you know, even at 20 times it's a $300 stock. And, you know, obviously you can argue for an even higher multiple given some of the things we just talked about.